Hello again. Chapter 10, video number 1. This time we are talking about Islam. Islam is the second largest religion in the world. It is, once again, the youngest religion that we've talked about in this course, replacing Christianity as an even younger religion. This one's about 1,500 years old, so again, still very old by human standards, but fairly young as far as religions go. And this is the last of our, what we refer to as Abrahamic religions, or some refer to them as the great monotheisms, although it's kind of a confusing term. But Christianity, Judaism, Islam, these three traditions that are all connected to one another. In order to talk about Islam, we need to start with its founder. This is another founded religion. In this case, we're talking about the Prophet Muhammad. And in order to understand the Prophet, you need to talk about Mecca, the city he came from. We're dealing with the 6th century here. So, what is this city like in the 6th century? Well, it's got some things going for it. For one thing, it's a very successful trade route city. It's on a couple of trade routes through the Arabian desert. So it's a place where people stop on their routes to spend money, where they bring goods from other places, where they buy goods to take to other places, and so forth. That keeps it a fairly vital and vibrant city. It keeps a constant flow of money coming into it. It's also a pilgrimage stop for pagans, for polytheists who go to a shrine, a polytheistic shrine, referred to today as the Kaaba, that is in this city of Mecca. And by the way, this is a very good thing economically. When you have something that attracts people from outside your community, that's good, right? Because you can all buy and sell to each other all day long, and the community never gets any richer or poorer. But if you can get someone to come who lives from elsewhere, spend some money at your city, and then go home, that's good. That brings more income into your environment. That's why Omaha is so big on the College World Series and has done so much to keep it, because a bunch of people come who aren't from there, they spend their money, and then they go home. So it becomes wealthier and wealthier. Mecca is making very good use of this. Mecca has a tribal-based society at this time, and there are some repercussions to that. The repercussions have to do with sort of social and ethical issues. The issues that come out of this are that in this particular form of tribal-based society, and just to be clear, we're not talking about like Native American tribes living out in the wilderness sort of things or out in a broad area. We're talking about urban tribes, tribes that live in the city together. People who are connected to one another by blood and see that as their primary social unit. And in this particular form of society, not all tribal societies, but the one we're talking about here certainly, this can lead to a lot of competition between tribes in order to get goods, resources, prestige, power in the city, and so forth. And it leads to a tribal sort of morality or ethics that says, essentially, what is good for me and my people is good, and what is bad for me and my people is bad. So it doesn't necessarily mean that stealing is bad. If you're stealing from a rival tribe, that could be good. It doesn't necessarily mean that murder is bad. You could kill someone from a rival tribe that gains your tribe power or influence, and that could be seen as ethically good. This is, by the way, something very, very similar to what can be seen in modern urban gangs, drug-based gangs. The idea that your loyalty is to your tribe, your unit, and that your ethics and morality are based on helping your people and hurting your enemies. So what this leads to is a fairly tricky sort of society to navigate. There's a lot of backstabbing. There's a lot of plotting, scheming. There's a lot of fragmentation in society. Everybody's got their own little group that they're concerned with, or their own large group, or a subgroup, and so forth. And by the way, we should also mention, religiously, there's lots of polytheism going on in this part of the world at the time, worship of multiple gods. And there's also Christianity and Judaism present. Those two traditions exist. People know about them. Christianity's been around hundreds of years. Judaism has been around many, many hundreds of years. And so those are also known parts of this environment. Well, into this environment, we encounter Muhammad. He's born in the year 570, so towards the last part of the 6th century. And he has a rough life, frankly. He's an orphan at a young age. By age 6, he's an orphan, and could very easily sort of fall through the cracks of this society. He's taken in by an uncle who has some authority within the tribe. He's a tribal leader and takes care of Muhammad. It prevents him really from facing a more difficult life than he did. And as he gets older, he marries a wealthy widow named Khadijah, who's also a very important person in his life and seems to be a very supportive figure throughout all that he goes through. So he has some things going for him, but this doesn't change the fact that he is troubled by society. The world around him is upsetting. It seems wrong. It's something that he is praying for guidance regarding how to deal with this world. He's retreating from society, going to be by himself to go meditate, essentially pray on this issue. And it's during this time, when Muhammad is 40 years old, that he receives a message from God. It's God sends an angel, the angel brings a message, and Muhammad is told to recite this message to the people. And this is where we get our first aspects of what will become Islam. And by the way, I think this is worth taking a moment to note. Islam is very careful about avoiding the sorts of issues that I told you about in chapter 9 with Christianity. In Islam, there's a very clear distinction that God is God. God doesn't have any subparts. He can't be divided. He never becomes a human. He is God and completely separate from humanity. Humans are humans and completely at the mercy of God. Muhammad is not a God. He is not divine. He is not the manifestation of God. He is not any of these things. He's a person. He's a prophet, meaning he delivers a message for God, but that's it. And so Islam very intentionally separates the idea of Muhammad as a role model for behavior. You look to his life, look to the events, the reactions that he had to them. These are the hadith that are referred to in your vocabulary. And then you also have the Quran. And the Quran is the book of what God said for Muhammad to say. And by the way, the word Quran just comes from this term recitation. Quran means the book of stuff that Muhammad recited on behalf of God. So there's no notion in Islam that Muhammad is coming up with any of this on his own. He's just the mouthpiece of God. And it's a very important distinction to come back from. So what is it that Muhammad is teaching? What is this message that he's bringing back? The heart of it's fairly easy to understand. There is only one God. That's the very first bit of Islam that you need to understand. This is radical for people who are polytheists and pagans and worship multiple gods, but we've been talking about Christianity and Judaism for the last couple chapters, so this is something we're fairly familiar with. Humans should submit to this God completely. That's what the word Islam and Muslim actually both come from this root word, which means to submit, submission to God. In fact, that's something that makes Islam an unusual tradition. This idea that it's actually named after a verb. It's named after an action. Most religions are named after a person or sometimes a place or sometimes something like the Tao in Taoism or the spirits of Shinto. But this is named after the act of submitting to God, surrender to the will of God. So there is one God, you need to surrender to him. And the other part of Muhammad's message is that Muhammad is the final and complete messenger of God. Meaning he will bring the total prophecy of God to humankind. He is speaking everything God needs for us to know all together in one place at one time. This is important because what's being said here is Islam is part of a continuity with Judaism and Christianity. Moses was a prophet of God. Abraham was a prophet of God. Jesus was a prophet of God. Islam recognizes all of that. What Islam says is, among these prophets, mistakes have been made. Not mistakes that the prophets necessarily made, certainly not mistakes that God made, but mistakes that humans have made in the understanding of these prophecies. These were incomplete prophecies, and humans have had flawed responses to them. So what God is going to do to fix this is give a final and complete prophecy. He's going to break down everything humans need to know, and that's Islam. That's the idea behind this. So where those other prophets match with Islam, you know they're correct. Where those other prophets deviate from Islam, that means that some sort of error has crept into those messages. Human error has caused them to deviate from God's original plan. Alright, I'll meet you at video number 2, and we'll pick up right there with the life of the prophet.